When I first started podcasting, it took me way too long to edit my podcast episodes. For every 45 to 60 minute episode I created, it would take me between 4 and 8 hours to fully edit and publish that episode. With the amount of time it took editing, I knew I wasn't going to be able to keep up with finding guests, interviewing the guests, marketing the show, and focusing on other aspects of my business if editing was going to continue taking me this long. My name is Nick Nelbach, and today I'll be sharing 4 tips you can use to drastically cut down your editing time so you can focus on driving more listeners to your show and get more time back in your day. Now, before we get into it, if you find this video helpful, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any other videos like this. Okay, for most of these tips, we're going to be editing in Adobe Audition. If you're on Audacity or GarageBand, there are very similar functions. They just might be called something different. Even if you aren't using Audition, there are likely still tips and effects you can apply with whatever editing software that you use. For the first tip, we're going to dive into Adobe Audition and we're going to automatically remove silence from our audio. One of the most time-consuming things that I was doing with my podcast was trying to remove every awkward silence or space in the audio that didn't fit. And that took me hours alone. With Adobe Audition, we're going to automatically delete out all of those silences so that we aren't manually selecting and picking them out. Okay, so here is our audio file. As you can see, we have pretty big gaps in our audio here. Rather than coming in here, zooming in, trying to select and make sure that this sounds right and delete, we are just going to run a function in Audition that's going to automatically get rid of that for us. So first off, we're going to select everything in this audio. I use Control A and that will select everything on the track. Next, if you don't already have it open, you're going to choose Diagnostics, and this is what we're going to use to actually delete the silences out. So in the Diagnostics panel on the side here, you will see that we have a couple different options. We have Declicker, Declipper, Delete Silence, and Mark Audio. We're going to use that Delete Silence. Now, there are a few settings in here that we can adjust and play with to figure out how much silence we want to delete and what is actually going to be defined as a silence. So in my settings, we're going to define a silence as a signal that is below -40 dBs and it's lasting for more than 500 milliseconds. And then we are going to define audio as a signal that is above -40 dBs for more than 25 milliseconds. And lastly, we're going to pick between delete silence and shorten silence. I personally prefer to use shorten silence. We want to leave a little bit of a buffer on each end of that silence. If it becomes a hard cut between each of those ends, the audio is going to sound really awkward and it's not going to sound very natural. So we want to leave ourselves a little bit of a buffer on each end of that audio. So we have it set to 200 milliseconds with our audio track selected, and we're just going to hit scan. So now here in this panel, we can see these are all of the areas that Adobe Audition found that met our criteria. So we're going to click shorten all. Okay, so now you can see that Adobe pulled together all of that audio into one clip right here. So we go back and see what it looked like before. This is our original audio, and this is our new audio. All of those silences are removed, and we didn't have to go manually do that work. Like I mentioned before, this one tip could save you hours of editing time. As I'm sure you know, editing out an entire 60-minute episode or 45-minute episode, when you have to go listen through that entire 45, 60-minute episode and then make your edits, it's going to take you way more than 60 minutes to get that done. So in this next tip, we're going to actually be increasing the playback speed so we can get through that podcast episode a lot faster. Okay, so I have my multi-track pulled up, and we're going to bring in that audio that we just edited. We deleted all the silences out, and this audio is ready to now kind of scrub through and find any areas of the podcast episode that we want to delete. Now, obviously, we're working with a sample. This is only 2 minutes long. It wouldn't be that long to run through it, but we're going to pretend like this is like a 30-minute, 60-minute episode. Rather than go through and listen through this entire thing,
I love that.
We're actually going to increase the playback speed. So in order to do that, we're going to come up here and we're going to toggle on the global clip stretching tool. By default, it should look like this. We're just going to click it, and that's going to pop it right on. After you click that on, you should see a little triangle up here, and you'll see a little timer as well, and it says stretch. So we're just going to click and drag, and we're going to move that to wherever we want. We'll say 1:20. After we do that, we can see that it dropped it to 63%. Usually when I do my edits, I'll actually drop it down to about 50%, and I'll run through the episode at about 50. This is really going to come down to your own personal preference. At the beginning, you might have to start with 80% or 75%. And as you get more comfortable listening through the audio, you can start slowly increasing that or decreasing the percentage and work through the episodes a lot faster. So now that we have our playback speed increased, we're going to listen through and find areas of the episode that we want to delete. Okay, so once you've made all of your edits, this next step becomes extremely important. If you don't follow this next step exactly, your audio is going to be very messed up. So now that all of our edits are made, we want to get this audio back to 100% and not at the 52% that we were editing on. Now, just like before, when we brought it from 100% down to 52, we grabbed this little triangle and we stretched it. But if we go and grab this triangle and we stretch it back, we're only stretching that one file. So rather than just grabbing the one, we want to make sure that we select everything that we initially reduced down to that 52%. Usually when I make these edits, I edit everything at the same time. So I know I can select all of the audio tracks and just drag it all back out. So we're going to hit Control A once again to select everything, or you can use your move tool here and you can select everything that way. Now we're going to go drag this back out to 100%. Okay, so now we're back at 100%. This is the original sound of our audio, and our podcast is now completely edited. And we did all of that without having to listen through an entire podcast episode at regular speed to get all of that work done. Now, the third tip we're going to be looking at is creating an effects favorite. So if you add effects to your audio, maybe you add a little bit of compression, some parametric equalizer, you do all these things to make your audio sounding great. But every time you go to create a new episode, you got to go through, create those effects again. And it just becomes another time-consuming thing that gets in the way of us actually getting this episode finished. In Adobe Audition, we can actually create an effects favorite that saves all of the effects that we created, and it will run on the click of a button. So here we're going back to our original audio that we were playing with, and we're going to add some effects to this. But we're not just going to click and add the effects in. We're going to create a favorite for this effect. What we're going to do, we're going to go to favorites up in the top, and down at the bottom, we're going to say start recording favorite. And now we can start actually editing the episode how we normally would, get the audio sounding the way we want. So I'm going to come in here. I'm just going to add a few effects to this. I'm going to add a compressor. I'm going to add a parametric equalizer and get that in there. And then we are going to add, let's just add one more compression to make it sound, make all these audio files level. Okay, so say that was all the effects we want to add. Now that we're done editing that episode, we're going to click stop recording favorite. Now we can name this thing. So we're going to say YouTube effect test. All right, sweet. So now that is saved. When we come up into favorites, we have YouTube effect test. Now the next time we pull in an audio file, we can literally just click on that favorite, and all of those effects that we just ran through will automatically be applied to that audio. Typically, this tip works a lot better for solo podcasts or editing your own audio. If you are bringing on multiple different guests in different environments, different recording setups, software, all of that, it is going to change the way that you edit that episode. So for my own audio, when I interview guests, I know that my environment is never going to really change. The audio is going to sound very similar from recording to recording. So I can apply that effect to my own audio and save me half of the time of cleaning up that audio, making it sound great. Okay, now for this last tip, we don't even need Adobe Audition. We just need to adjust our mindset. So tip number 4, we're going to cut out the BS. And no, I don't mean we're literally going to cut the BS out of our episode. I mean, we're going to cut out the BS that we have in our minds. When I started editing the podcast, I would go through and I would be so meticulous, delete out every filler word, anything that I thought sounded unnatural or awkward, I would just delete out. And that alone can take up so much of your time. The time you spend editing out every single in your podcast episode is not worth the payoff or the return on that. Podcasts are meant to be conversational. They're meant to be you having a conversation with a guest or with the audience that is listening on the other side. They are not expecting you to be perfect. So why put that expectation on yourself as well? Now, while I was still creating these episodes and I was editing out all this stuff because I thought it had to be absolutely perfect, any was going to drive listeners away, I actually edited an episode and I sent it to a friend of mine, and I didn't remove a lot of the that I normally would. I wasn't as meticulous and as much of a perfectionist with this episode. He listened through the episode and had great things to say about it. So I asked him, what about the and the other filler words? Like, didn't that bother you or bug you? And he straight up told me he did not notice any of them until I brought it up to him. So when it comes to editing, you are your own biggest enemy. These conversations are meant to be natural and no one is expecting you to be perfect. Once you realize this tip can help save you hours. Okay, now if you use these 4 tips, I can guarantee that your editing time is going to dramatically decrease. Editing shouldn't take you days and days or hours and hours to actually complete this. As you become more comfortable editing, you're going to be able to spend less time on that side of the process and spend more time creating your content and sharing your story and business with the world. Okay, that is it. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you have any other questions regarding editing or podcasting in general, be sure to leave them down in the comments below.